Well, folks, the state of Maine in the 2026 Senate races is going to be a competitive race. This is one of the top targets for the Democrats in 2026. We know they do not have a lot of opportunities to go on the offensive, but also the Republicans don't have that many seats that they have to defend. But this is one of those seats that they must defend heavily, because we know Susan Collins is a very important senator and an important vote in the U.S. Senate. Because the reality is if Susan Collins is not in this race, this will be won by a Democrat. People may not like Susan Collins because she only votes with the Republican Party 80% of the time instead of 99% of the time. But the reality is this is not just I don't like Susan Collins. There is an alternative. You have to weigh it against the alternative. The alternative to Susan Collins is a Democrat that supports the Republican Party's initiatives 1 or 2% of the times, versus Susan Collins, who's going to support the Republican Party 80 or 85% of the time, and also is going to push back on some more of the fringe ideas that are espoused within inside of the Republican Party. So we're going to dive into all of that today, analyzing the 2026 Senate race in Maine. But before we get into it, drop down below, hit that subscribe button. Make sure you never miss another video from us again in the future. Now, we all know Maine is a liberal state. You look at the 2024 presidential election, you will see it did not vote for Donald Trump. It voted for Kamala Harris by roughly 7 points. So this is not a landslide victory for the Democrats, but this is a healthy margin in the state of Maine. But we also know two things can be true at the same time: that a state can be relatively liberal, but can very much support a conservative like Susan Collins. Susan Collins was initially elected back in 1997, I believe. She is currently running her 7th campaign for Senate, which will be to serve her 6th term. Initially elected back 1996, inaugurated in 97, beat out her Democrat opponent at that time by roughly about 6 points, went on to win many huge elections and some closer elections. She won in 2002 against, she is actually Representative Pingree, went on to be a representative, and she is actually looking to challenge Susan Collins in 2026, won by roughly 17 points. 2008, beat out her Democrat opponent by about 25 points. 2014, just smoked him by almost 40 points. Fast forward to 2020, you're looking at a closer margin of about 8 points. Now to 2026, where Susan Collins will most likely face off either against, I think it's either going to be, Pingree, Janet Mills, Jared Golden. Those are the three that I'm really, really looking at to jump in the race on the Democrat side. We know Jared Golden, he tries to put himself more as a moderate Democrat. You know, he was the one Democrat who voted for the continuing resolution passed by the Republican Party a couple weeks ago. We know that Jared Golden tries to play more of that moderate position. He has represented Maine's congressional district number 2 since Trump's first midterms in 2018 when Jared Golden won. Now, right now, I think it's safe to say that I would, if we're looking at a map, now I have these as the toss-ups because these are just the ones that I like to talk about. But if we're looking at Maine, right now I have this listed as a slight Republican advantage. And I think as time moves on, it's going to be more of a lean Republican advantage. And I'm going to explain what my thoughts are behind that. Why I think this is a lean state for the Democrat or for the Republican Party if Susan Collins is in this race, which we know she's going to run, but just because there's a lot that has to go into this. And we're going to start by looking at a vote that she had in a speech she made on the Senate floor yesterday. Yesterday, there was a vote that there was an effort to overturn an emergency declaration that was signed into law or executed by Donald Trump earlier this year, which declared an emergency declaration at our northern border. Now, because that emergency declaration is placed in place, the president then has the ability to impose tariffs on imported goods from that country. He does not have the power. I think there's a lot of people need to consider the fact that, yes, a lot of people, I'm kind of mixed on Trump's Liberation Day. I think there are some good aspects and some bad aspects. I like the idea in general. Do I like the specifics of it? No. Because the reality is why is Israel getting a 17% tariff? Why is Israel getting a 17% tariff when they have zero tariffs on the United States of America? Because what the Trump administration is espousing. And I support Donald Trump. I voted for him. I 100% support him. Do I support all of his policies? No. Do I think that this could be better focused? Yes. Do I think there's a different way, a better way to go about this? 100%. They're imposing a 17% tariff on Israel when Israel doesn't have any tariffs on us. Well, I thought it was reciprocal tariffs. Well, we're calling it reciprocal tariffs, but it really is just, we're looking at the percentage difference between our imports versus our imports from their country versus our exports to their country, and taking that percentage and deeming that is the tariff rate, which is just totally not true. If it was true reciprocal tariffs, tit for tat, Israel would have 0 tariffs on them. But because it's not really about reciprocal tariffs, it's about the deficit with Israel, which is just kind of ridiculous. It's ridiculous. I think you can make the case of, with some bigger countries, China, Canada, Mexico, the EU. I think there is a case to be made when it comes to trade deficits. Don't get me wrong. But when we're talking with little countries like Israel, the trade deficit doesn't matter. It really doesn't. It doesn't matter at all. We need to shore up U.S. manufacturing jobs, of course, in industries that are vital for national security. Outside of that, we need free and fair trade. We need to have tariffs when it comes to pharmaceuticals, chip manufacturing, automobile manufacturing, steel and aluminum production. That is what we need to protect in the United States for national and, of course, like defense industry, high quality, highly capable missiles and defense technology that's developed in the United States. There needs to be tariffs in place for that, of course. I support tariffs for that, and I also support tariffs to what would you say? To untangle our relationship with China. We need the United States needs to be less dependent on China. I 100% agree with that. But when we're just going to attack Canada for illegal immigration and fentanyl, there's plenty of things you can attack Canada on. You can attack Canada because they don't spend enough money on defense, that they rely on the United States for their defense spending. They're able to enact a lot of their social policies in Canada because they don't have to worry about defense spending. They're able to have a single-payer system in Canada. They don't have to worry about innovation in the pharmaceutical industry because the United States, we take care of over 50% of all new developed drugs, cures, remedies. They come from the United States, 50% of them. So there's a lot that the United States does to subsidize Canada. But if we're going to attack them for illegal immigration and fentanyl, I just don't think it's not warranted. We are treating Canada the same way we're treating Mexico, and that is going to hurt the state economy in Maine. And this is why what Susan Collins is doing, I think, is going to actually boost her support in Maine. She said Maine's economy is deeply integrated with Canada, just like most of the U.S., and they're a very important trading partner. We get oil from them, gasoline from them, petroleum products. We get, oil here that we then refine in the United States and sell for a very handsome profit. And I think what she is doing here is actually going to help her support in Maine. I think overall in the GOP, it's not going to help her support, but I think it's going to help her support in the state of Maine. But the reality is that this is going to be a very competitive race. Very competitive race, and she's taking a stand when it comes to these tariffs. Like I said, all about tariffs on China, all about tariffs on Mexico, all about reciprocal tariffs. But if we're going to do reciprocal tariffs, they actually need to be reciprocal tariffs, not tariffs based off trade deficits. You have a trade deficit with everyone. Just like I have a trade deficit with Target. I have a trade deficit with the Aldi that's a mile down the road from my house. I buy a lot of products from them. Do they buy any products from the 2 businesses that I own? No, they don't. Does that mean I'm not going to go to Aldi? No. Because it is just because we buy a certain thing from them doesn't mean that there's an actual market for products from the United States there. Now, if they put barriers in place to keep American products out, I'm all about that. Let's tariff them and get them to reduce those barriers, reduce the trade or the tariffs so our products, so there can be open competition. But if there is not a demand for our product there, we cannot force demand to exist. We can't. But if there is monetary or duties that are imposed on imports from the United States, therefore we don't import a lot of things or export a lot of things from the United States to another country, I'm all about reciprocal tariffs when it comes to that. We just can't lie about this like the Trump administration did in this Liberation Day. You can't lie about it. But Susan Collins is going to be a lot more popular because of this stand that she has taken against the Trump administration here when it really comes to securing the duties that are vested by the Constitution in the legislative branch. President Trump does not have the authority to unilaterally impose tariffs on other countries for no reason. And I don't think having a trade deficit with a country is now considered an emergency or that requires an emergency declaration. I just don't. I don't buy into it for a second. Congress needs to take back, the Conservative Party, we are all about reducing the size of government. Let's return the proper powers. There are certain powers that are vested in the executive branch, like when it comes to the temporary protected status. The Democrats are out there trying to find a judge who believes that immigration and the temporary protected status is within the purview of the court system when it's not. We need to return that power to the executive branch. They have the sole authority, and it's at their discretion who receives temporary protected status. But in that same breath, you also have to recognize that there are certain powers that are vested in the executive branch or that are being used by the executive branch that are actually vested by the Constitution in the legislative branch, like tariffs. Now, granted, I'm all about the emergency declaration for China, Canada, reciprocal tariffs, 100%. But just going after Canada for fentanyl when less than 1%, it's less than like 0.001% of all fentanyl seized at the borders in 2024 was seized at the northern border. That's the reality of the situation here. And I'm not doing this because I want to undercut the Trump administration. I'm doing this because I want the Trump administration to win. I want them to get huge approvals. I want the Trump administration to be cemented in history as a great administration. But doing stupid things like this is not going to get you there. But this is a big thing that is going to help Susan Collins in Maine. She's taking a stand against the Trump administration. And this is that 20% when we talked about it. She's going to vote with the Republican Party 80% of the time, vote against it 20%. This is one of those times. And especially when it's the Trump party. It's not even the Republican Party. It's voting against Trump and what Donald Trump wants. Because there are times when Donald Trump needs to be reined in. He is not this all-knowing superhuman. He's not. He's a human. He makes mistakes. He has flaws. And this is one of those where I don't believe we should have a emergency declaration when it comes to our northern border. Should we do everything we can with Canada to get them to reduce tariffs on like dairy products and tobacco from the United States? Absolutely. Let's let dairy farmers compete in Canada's economy. Let's let American dairy farmers compete with dairy farmers in Canada. Let's do that. But let's not just slap tariffs on for no reason. It's just very ridiculous to think of that. But getting back to the election, obviously we talked about the electoral history here and government control. We know Maine's government is controlled by Democrats. Even though the other senator is an independent, he caucuses with the Democrat Party. There's a Democrat governor there. The legislature is controlled by the Democrats. This is a Democrat state, a liberal state. But somehow, because of what Susan Collins has been able to tap into, she is able to win these elections. And like I said, as of right now, I'm going to put this as a slight to lean Republican state right now. And, the National Republican the Senatorial Committee, Tim Scott, the chairman, said they're going to be looking to spend almost $600 million in that state. Quote, and this is from Campaign and Elections. Scott told donors at the National Republican Senatorials Committee's winter meeting in Palm Beach, Florida over the weekend that next year's Senate race in Maine, where Republican Senator Susan Collins is up for re-election, could see as much as $600 million in spending, according to a GOP fundraiser who heard Scott's remarks. He also predicted that the price tag for the Senate race in North Carolina will likely run even higher. Wow. Gonna spend a lot of frickin' money. A lot of money to get these people out to vote. A lot of money. But that's what you have to do. This is the world that we live in right now. This is what we have to do. We have to make sure that we can hold on to the seat, because ultimately the goal of the Republican Party is to increase in the Senate the majority that they have to 54, 55, 56 seats. And that runs directly through holding the state of Maine. It is just as simple as that. You have to hold the state of Maine if you want to get there. If Maine collapses, there's a good chance that North Carolina collapses as too. There's a good chance that Chris Sununu doesn't win in New Hampshire if that happens as well. So this is just kind of like, Trump won all 7 swing states in 24. I think we could see something similar here, where if the tide is against the Republicans, you are going to see it nationwide. And especially if it's going to be against these more establishment Republicans like a Chris Sununu, like a Tom Tillis, like a Susan Collins, like a Brian Kemp. If you see if those candidates are hurting in these races, it's not going to be good for the Republican Party across the board. And you could see other states that could potentially be in play. You could see places like Iowa maybe being within 5 points. I think Ohio, I think if there's the right Democrat candidate there, like a Sherrod Brown or a Tim Ryan, I think it could be a lot closer. Outside of those, I think it's going to be a pretty big blow up. But ultimately, the state of Maine, 2026, we have to hold the seat. We do not have a choice. We can rip on Susan Collins all we want, but we really, really actually need her. And she plays a pivotal role inside of the Republican Party. She plays a very pivotal role. She is a checks and balance. And it's just kind of ridiculous. It's time for Maine to become self-sufficient again. Retire? Are you kidding me? Do you want the Republicans to lose this seat? Is there any forethought into the comments that you put here? I am ashamed you are my senator, period. Why? Because she is trying to rightfully reclaim the powers that are delegated to the legislative branch of government? Because she doesn't want to get into a trade war with Canada over something that really doesn't matter at all? Like I said, I'm all about let's use tariffs when it comes to Canada, when it comes to defense spending, when it comes to tariffs that they have on our products, reciprocal tariffs. But if we're going to deem it because of the 1.1001% of fentanyl that's seized at the northern border, I think that's stupid. And I think you're really trying to stretch it at that point. Really, really trying to stretch it. You obviously aren't here for the American people. No, she's not here for the American people, you dumbass. She's here for the people of Maine. She represents the people of Maine, the constituents of Maine. It is a liberal-leaning state. Do you not understand that? No, she is not here for the American people. She's here for the people of Maine. Just insane. Just absolutely insane. But we are going to see what happens. I think ultimately, if she is going to fundraise well, she's going to have a lot of money poured into the state from the Republicans. Obviously, the Democrats are going to pour a lot of money into this. Susan Collins' seat has been a top target for Democrats for years. It absolutely has been. They know she is a conservative who governs in a liberal state. Obviously, it makes for an easy target. Easy target. But in reality, is it? Is it really that easy of a target? So that's going to wrap things up for today. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments on the 2026 Senate race in Maine. We will catch you next time, folks. Drop down below, hit that subscribe button.